everybody. My name is Karen. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is December 25th, 1987.
20 what? 6?
26, coming up, 25 now. I'm just going to probably fight with this all night, so let me know if it gets... Can you still hear me? Okay, if I put it back a little bit? All right, I'll just stand back a little bit. Every time I speak, I can't help but think back to the first time anybody asked me to speak. I was 6 months sober. So I went in there and I thought, all right, I'll tell it like it is. And I'm sure they're going to tell me that I'm not really an alcoholic like they are. They'll tell me that, it was nice of me to come, but I don't have to come anymore. Well, much to my dismay, they said, keep coming back, dear. This is where you belong. And of course, I kept coming back, and this is where I belong. So, thank you, Brad. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I've already gotten to see some people I haven't seen in quite a while, so this is fun for me. Many, many years ago, I was born in a town of Springfield, Ohio, and I was born into a family full of alcoholics. My mother and father had both been married before, and my mother had 2 children by that marriage. So I had a half-brother 18 years older than I am, and a half-sister 20 years older than I am. I didn't have any other siblings, so from now on I'll just call them my brother and my sister. But when I came into this world, my mother was an alcoholic, my father was an alcoholic. My brother and sister were probably in the process of becoming hardcore alcoholics, as were their spouses. I have had an uncle who was perhaps the worst alcoholic, but he may not have exceeded my aunt, who was really the worst, and they each had spouses that were all so bad. They were, to use the term, functioning alcoholics. I don't know if they really function as a full-blown alcoholic, but they had jobs. The women were housewives, and everybody had a nice house and cars, and did the normal thing. But each of them came to a very bad end with their alcoholism. It did, in fact, ruin each and every one of their lives. When I was born, my mother was 42, and she was just not in the mood to raise another child. She didn't like the first 2, and at age 42, this was not... She wanted me so she didn't have to go to work, but that was it, And because she didn't really want me or anything to do with me, she ignored me. And my father traveled a lot. I didn't have any siblings at home, and we never lived in places where there were any kids for me to play with. So I was basically alone. And when I think back on all those days, all I can remember is her sitting on the couch smoking, or talking on the phone, smoking. That's all she ever did. And I wasn't allowed to interrupt those things. So I don't know if I was born an introvert or I just learned to stay out of the way. Because if I interrupted her, she would get very, very angry with me. And she had some problems that I didn't know at the time were problems. I just thought she was a mean mommy. But she was a very unhappy woman. And when she got particularly down, she took it out on me. She wouldn't talk to me at all for days. And my dad wasn't there, so I just learned to lay low and play by myself and stay out of her way. And as I say, my father traveled, so he really didn't know how bad it was. And later when I'd say, isn't there something you could do? He'd say, well, your mother's just your mother. She treated him as badly as she treated me, and he was just able to get away from her more. When I was 3.5 years old, much to my dismay, my sister had a daughter, and her name was Robin. And Robin was cute. Robin had curly blonde hair. At the time, I had straight black hair. Robin was vivacious and bubbly, and I'd learned to lay low and just show no emotions, because if I did, I'd be criticized for being too happy. If I was sad, I'd be criticized for being too sad. So I was I was nothing. Robin also had dimples. I mean, she was just awful. I hated her. Fortunately, she lived in Cleveland. We lived in Springfield. She didn't come to visit very often. But when she did, I was in agony. One time, when she was there and my mother left us alone, I bit her really hard on the arm. When somebody bites somebody really hard, maybe you've never seen it, but the teeth marks are really, really deep, and there's sort of blood under the bottom. And when my mother saw that, Robin was screaming. She said, "You must have done this." I said, "Oh no, somebody else must have come in and done that." And we learned to lie early. And she really didn't punish me for that. I think she knew that she treated Robin a lot better than she treated me. And so she just sort of backed off. And I always thought that was sort of interesting. I apologized to Robin 30 years later. That was part of my deal, and she didn't remember it. But fortunately today, my mother always treated her better, and I always hated her. But today we're very good friends and really enjoy spending time together. When I started school, that was a really good thing because I was pretty talented as far as being able to keep up with the schoolwork. And I enjoyed it. It was out of the house, and it was just a nice place to be. And I tried really hard to be nice to the teachers so they would like me. And teachers like that, when you really try hard to please. Not all teachers, but a lot of them do. And that worked out really well, and I got really good at reading people to see what they wanted and then acting accordingly. So school was a good thing for me. But the bad part of school was that because I never lived near anybody or didn't have any brothers and sisters, I never learned how to play games or do sports. And everybody else seemed to have learned that somewhere along the way. So I always felt out of it because I couldn't do that. I was always the last one to be picked for anybody's team. And, just all that bad kind of stuff that helps us have a low self-esteem. When I was about 9 years old, my mother decided to try to fix me. And one of the things she did was get me braces. Well, that many years ago, that was not a prestigious thing. I just looked weird, and the kids laughed at me. So that was so much for that. She put pimple cream on my face at night and curlers in my hair. But the next morning, things hadn't changed, and I was still the same as I'd gone to bed. And then I developed early physically. And she didn't want to dress me in kids' clothes anymore because I wasn't that size anymore. So she started dressing me in her clothes. Well, that's bad enough to go to school in your mother's clothes. But she didn't use deodorant. And when I went to school, not only did I look silly, I smelled bad. Well, so much for the teachers liking me. It just, that was the end of that. The other thing she decided to do was that if I couldn't play sports or do anything, I needed to do something else. So we agreed upon taking piano lessons. Well, she was thrilled and just assumed I'd be a child prodigy. And I wasn't. For lots of reasons, I wasn't any good at that. But it was very interesting because she would tell her friends that I was good, and I wasn't. So it sort of dawned on me that you don't have to be something. As long as you tell people you are, and they never find out, that's okay. That also plays into alcoholism. She also said that I was fat. And when I look at pictures of back then, you have all these family things, I wasn't. But then, because she said that, I thought I was. So, that's always stuck with me. Even when I see those pictures, I think, well, I must have been fat before that. And today, some people think I spend too much time and effort on how I look. But the psychiatrist Carl Jung once said that usually if you look for it, there's a reason crazy people do crazy things. And today, if I do that, I have my reasons. So I continue to do that rather than take more therapy than I do already. When I was 12, we moved to Cleveland, Ohio, so that's where my sister lived. And we had a really nice house on Lake Erie. Again, away from anybody, so there were no kids to play with, but it was nice. And my mother decided I should do more things. So my dad, on weekends, would take me out. We had a little boat, and we'd go out and go fishing on the weekends, and that was fun. And sometimes after work, if he had time, we'd go do that. So I thought, well, I'd like to learn to fish better. So I tried that, and I took my little fishing reel and rod down to the water, and I started casting out into the water. Well, there wasn't anybody around, and I'm physically challenged in anything like that, and I hooked my back with the hook, with the worm on it. So it was a long way up the hill, and I walked up the hill with this thing, pulling my back, and when I got up to the top, somebody helped me take the thing out. So that was that for fishing after work. And I sort of gave up after that, and she gave up and just let me stay in my room and read my books. So up to this point in my life was very confusing to me. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing or the wrong thing, and I didn't know if I'd be criticized or not criticized. I had flaws and hadn't proven to be fixable. And I wasn't good enough, but I could pretend to be and just hope that no one ever found out. So that's the basis here. But there was one source of comfort in my life, and she really did save my sanity. My sister, who had actually moved to be closer with us in Cleveland, told me later that she did because she knew I needed somebody to look out for me. She knew my mother's issues. She'd lived with her too, and as my mother drank more and got nastier and nastier, she went to a lawyer to see if she could file to get custody of me. And back then the lawyer said, unless she's physically abusing her, mental cruelty doesn't matter, and she has to stay where she is. But my sister was very, very nice, and she would take me on vacations with her family. And I had to play with Robin, but that was okay, and her little brothers. And I got to go places and see things that my parents would never do for me. So that was really good. But most of all, my sister would talk to me, and she would listen to me. And I started to feel that, I had somebody in my corner. So without that, I don't know where I would have gone, but at least she's always been there for me and still is. By the time I got to high school, my mother kept a bottle in the closet, and she would stay in there every night and drink. My dad, if he was home, had to go to work in the morning, so he'd go to bed, and she would just stay there and drink. And drinking did not make her a happier person. So she continued to get worse. Well, by this time, I'm having problems in school. I didn't know how to act. I just knew how to pretend. I didn't fit in with anybody. I never felt good enough to try to make friends. So there was this one group of kids that were horrible to me. I won't go into all of it, but today it would be called bullying. That's exactly what it was. And fortunately, I could call my sister, and I told her, this is what these kids are doing. I don't know what to do. I hate it here. Please don't tell my parents I don't have to go to school. And so my parents did take me to the principal and told them what was going on. And, principals didn't know what to do either. And they said, well, there's nothing I can do. Maybe it'll get better. And fortunately, I had a friend who went to a girls' school, and she knew what was going on, and she helped me and get my parents to transfer me to that girls' school. And that was so much better because I was good academically, and that was rewarded in that school. And the girls were nice. So, I thought that my life was really taking a turn for the better. The problem was that because my parents were spending money to send me to this private high school, my mother said there wouldn't be enough money to send me to college. Well, I knew that that was my way out. That was the only way I was going to get out of where I lived, was to go to college. So I begged and I pleaded and I gave them all sorts of reasons why it would be good for them if they sent me to college, how I could take care of them in their old age. I mean, just anything, to say, okay, let's send her to college. Well, my mother said, okay, she would do that, but the money had to come from somewhere, so she was going to start her own business, and the money would come in. Now, I don't know if my mother ever graduated from high school or not. That was not a subject that was allowed to be discussed at home, but I doubt that she did. And anyway, she had no sense for business at all. And she started this business, and she was mean to everybody there. She wasn't any good at it. And she blamed me for all the misery that this business caused her. And she had blamed me for everything in her life anyway. If it weren't for me, she could have done this, she could have done that. Well, today I know she would have never done any of those things anyway, but I believed it, I was a kid. And this one night she was going to a meeting of all the partners, and she was really worried about what was going to happen, and it was, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have to face this, and da-da-da-da. So she went, I went, and found 2 bottles, one of sleeping pills and one of aspirin, and I took them all. So they came home. I was passed out. They didn't know what was wrong, so they took me to the hospital. They pumped my stomach, and that's all they did then. There weren't such things as therapists or anything like that. So I went home and just realized that that really wasn't an option either. I just had to grit my teeth, get through this, and wait till I could go away to college. So I went, and when I got to college, I started to drink. And as soon as I started to drink, I realized that alcohol took away all the pain in my life. It was wonderful. I wasn't old enough to drink, but I got a fake ID. They were quite available. And I drank and went on a spree for 22 years after that. I don't need to tell you all the episodes that chronic alcoholism brings with it. I married the wrong people. I somehow graduated from college. I had high hopes of graduating with a certain degree, and I could never do that. And every year I would lower whatever, and I finally got out with a degree in elementary education by the skin of my teeth. And I knew I didn't want to do that. So as soon as I got home, I joined the airlines, which was a way to get out of Dodge, and I moved to Chicago. And I probably shouldn't tell you this, but in the airlines I found a lot of people I could drink with, and flight attendants, pilots, if there's a crash, it's pilot air. I mean, there's just a lot of drinking that goes on. Well, back then, maybe they've cleaned it all up by now, but that's the way it was then. And I also was able to get myself into graduate school, and because I knew I never wanted to teach, so I studied finance and ended up in banking and somehow got a halfway decent job there. But it'll probably surprise you to know that at one point I ended up marrying a man who was very mentally abusive to me. I mean, if you listen to him and my mother, you would think they were, of exactly the same lineage. He treated me just the way she treated me. I didn't know any better, so I stayed. And I hated him. I hated every aspect of my life. It looked okay from the outside. I think that was a problem because I had a good job, he had a good job. We had a nice house, cars, a country club. It all looked okay. It was just built on sand. There wasn't anything underneath it. And I started seeing a psychiatrist because I didn't understand it either. I mean, look, I have everything that my mother always said I should want. It's here. And she would say, you have everything, you should be so happy. And I was just really miserable. And a lot of it was because, as an alcoholic, I I lied a lot. I had to lie about how much I was drinking. I hated my husband, so I spent time with other men. Just lie. I hated the fact that I woke up every morning with a horrendous hangover. I've heard people say they didn't get hangovers. Well, I don't know how they ever didn't get them, because mine were brutal. My head would be throbbing, and I'd get up and drink a Coke every single morning, and take the Coke, take a couple of aspirin, and then eventually be okay to get ready to go to work. Well, by the time the alcohol wore off, about halfway through the day, I was really shaky. I mean, it's just that sugar wears off, and I didn't want to drink and eat because there's too many calories, so I just drank. So, my body wasn't doing too well either. And I looked really bad. I was, my face was puffy, and I had red veins in my face, and because I would wake up in the middle of the night, I think they call it the drinker's hour, the alcohol wears off, and you wake up and you can't go back to sleep, so I was tired, and I looked tired. And life was just really miserable. And when I think about, the easier, softer way and how hard that was, it was really hard to be a really daily drinker and be in that kind of shape. On Christmas Eve of 1987, I had spent the day with someone other than my husband, and I came home to him, and he wanted to know what plans I had made for Christmas Day. Well, I didn't have any plans, and so I just cooked dinner, and we drank and drank. And I pretty much got drunk every night, but this night I guess I just got more drunk than normal. And everybody always has a particular point in their bottom, and this was mine. The ladies may be the only ones who understand this, and those who are old enough to remember when we wore pantyhose. I could not get my pantyhose off to go to bed. I was standing there and couldn't do it. I sat down on the floor and I couldn't do it. They just kept getting all tangled up. It's happened to you, Dolores. So I ended up lying my back in bed and finally got them off. And at that point I thought, this just isn't working anymore, drinking this much. And I tried to cut down. I don't have to tell you all the ways I tried to cut down. I switched from scotch to beer. I switched from beer to wine. I tried drinking milk in my booze. I tried, I just, all this stuff you try. I tried all that, and I couldn't stop drinking. And I would promise, that I'm not going to drink until Friday, and if that was Monday, well, I could make it maybe till Tuesday. And the only thing was, I didn't drink during the day. I don't know why I didn't do that. I guess I thought if I did that, I'd know I was an alcoholic, and I didn't want to do that because there were all these commercials on TV. If you or somebody has a problem with alcohol, I just, no, not me. I'm going to do this. Anyway, the next morning, I put my head in my hands, and I said, help me, help me. I don't know who I said that to, but those were my words, and I didn't drink that day. And I haven't had a drink since that day. I'd been going to a psychiatrist, and the next time I went to see him, I fessed up to, I do drink pretty much, and that may have something to do with this. And bless that man's soul, he said, I can't help you with that, but I have a woman who's an alcoholic as a patient. I will have her see if she's willing to call you. And she did, and she took me to a meeting. And that was the beginning of the journey for me. And I'm forever grateful because I hear a lot of other visiting psychiatrist stories who don't turn out that well. Getting sober was really, really hard for me. I had a lot of false starts. It was really, really hard. It was I thought alcohol was what had held me together all those years. Alcohol was what took the pain away. How could I possibly live with this man if I couldn't drink. And it was just, how could I live my life and not drink? It was just unfathomable to me how I was ever going to do that. And I heard a woman say this once about recovery. She said, it's like trying to go from one car to another car on a moving passenger train. You have to walk out of one door and stand on that shaky platform and let that door go and open the door ahead of you. And I spent a lot of time on that shaky platform. It was just really, really awful for me. I did start seeing an alcoholism counselor, and she finally convinced me that I needed to go away to a 28-day treatment center. I tried to stop drinking at home, and it just didn't work. I really, really needed to spend the time to do that. But, I thought I was so important at work. How were they going to do without me for 28 days, which was really, how am I going to tell them where I'm going for 28 days? But I went, and I was very lucky because that's the time back in 87, 88, when rehabs were still being paid for by insurance. So I was able to go and spend a full 28 days there. And it was wonderful because it really allowed me to focus on looking at life in an entirely different way. I really hadn't had any guidelines to live by my entire life, and none of the alcoholics in my family were really able to give me any good guidelines. They didn't have, they weren't given any either. So I did learn that, these are the steps, and this is how you're going to do it. And I believed it, and I believed that I had a disease. I wasn't just flawed. There was something that I could treat and I could try to recover with this disease. And I came home and had some wonderful experiences. I got everybody together at work and told them where I'd been. And nobody fell off their chairs. They just came to me in my office one at a time later and said, well, just listen to my drinking and see what you think about this. Somebody always had a mother, something that, it was close to them too, so they didn't really criticize me. I'd been in Tucson, out in the sun for 30 days without doing anything, and I went to my hairdresser, and he said, oh my gosh, where have you been? And I told him, and he said, oh, my wife and I have been sober for 15 years. So it was just time after time I kept running into things that it's okay to be an alcoholic, and as long as I don't drink, this is a really good thing. So I stuck with it. I've always gone to meetings on a very regular basis. I've worked with sponsors. They were very patient with me. These people had to teach me how to live a regular, normal, non-alcoholic life, and it took a lot to do that. I've always had women friends in AA, and I've always tried to sponsor anybody who I was able to sponsor, and I still do that today. And I still go to regular meetings today. And all the promises have come true for me. As baffled as I was by life, for most of my life, today I can pretty much rely on my intuition. I do intuitively know. I've been taught to have good intuition, and it works today. I don't always have to say, well, what will they think if I do that? I pretty much know what I should do, and I do it. And usually people, if they don't like it, it's not that big of a deal. And if they don't like it and want to walk away, that's okay too. It's really important to me to be an honest, genuine person today, because it's just so much easier to sleep at night than the other way. The other thing that I should mention is that not only did I inherit the family's alcoholic genes, I also inherited aspects of my mother's mental problems. And today I deal with them, a psychiatrist, and take the prescribed drugs, which I do believe that you should take the drugs that you're prescribed to take. And the good thing is that I wouldn't have ever been able to do that if I'd still been drinking. I would have never been able to come to grips with that. And it's also helped me forgive my mother, because I know what she dealt with untreated. She had these same mental problems untreated. She had She was a terrible alcoholic, untreated, and her life must have been hell. You know, as much as other people didn't like her, she couldn't have liked herself either. And there, but for the grace of God, would have been the same way that I would have ended up. But through all this, I've never thought that for one moment that this all was of my own doing. Today I have a wonderful life. I found a wonderful husband in the program. I have all sorts of interests and talents that I've discovered, and I do lots of things that are a lot of fun. Sort of having a childhood I never had before. You know, this is really a lot of fun for me. But it would never have happened if I hadn't have asked for help that first night. And I don't know who I was asking. I do now, but I just said, help me. And I've also been given support by you guys every single step of the way. Whenever I wanted to know how to do something, what I should do, you've been there for me. And you know, that's the miracle of this program. And I'm just glad that you were all here and asked me to speak to you tonight. Thanks, Brad.